Ozone Park, Queens. It's the morning of September 14th, 2021, and a Hasidic Jew, known for their curly side curls and black top hats, is fixing his car on the street in Ozone Park. Emerging from a Comfort Inn motel is a former Jamaican gangster nicknamed Rico Dixon, who'd been a free man for only 11 months after serving 20 years in federal prison for helping to run a Flatbush dope crew called the Patio gang. Suddenly, the Hasidic Jew pulls a gun from a hiding place on the engine block of the car, turns, runs to Rico Dixon, and takes him out with a few well-placed pops that punctuate the morning air. He was no Hasidic at all. He was a hitman, stationed to take out the only leader of the Patio crew remaining breathing free air and in free land. Or perhaps he was a relative of one of the Patio gang's former murder victims from Brooklyn's bad old days in the 90s. Either way, he was the waiter, and his service was revenge, a dish always best served cold. Rico Dixon is dead, and his brother Emil is still serving a life no parole sentence. The entire incident and lead up to the hit was caught on a surveillance video. As you can see, it doesn't look like our Hasidic brother's first bar mitzvah, so to speak. He was a professional. Now, the 47-year-old Dixon was less than a year removed from finishing a 2-decade prison stint, like I said, for murder and drugs. Back in 2001, he was convicted in the 1992, which was a cold case, gangland slaying of rival drug dealer Alfonso Juke Gooden. Rico Dixon and his brother Emil founded the Patio crew back in the early 90s in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Now, Emil Dixon is serving life for the 1990 first-degree homicide of a guy named Robert Raga Thompson, a local wholesale marijuana dealer that the Dixon brothers thought was cooperating with the people. The Patio crew was made up of mostly young guys who traced their roots either directly or through their parents through Jamaica. And authorities suspect Jermaine Dixon's murder last week is tied to former Patio crew activities, possibly to members of Juke Gooden or Raga Thompson's families seeking to avenge their loved ones' cold-blooded killings. Probably. Now, the Dixon brothers have a penchant for getting themselves on the national news, actually. Emil's case was marked as one of the first drug-related death penalty cases under former Attorney General John Ashcroft. Now, Emil Dixon's case was one of the death penalty cases that former Attorney General John Ashcroft was trying to push during the late 90s, kind of a backlash to the Jamiacan posse scare of the 80s. Apparently, the Patio crew was a high-level target of the U.S. Justice Department, and the quest to give Emil Dixon the death penalty played out in the major New York and national newspapers. Emil dodged the death penalty thanks to the jury not giving it to him, despite Federal Attorney General John Ashcroft forcing his prosecutors in New York to seek the death penalty in his case. Now, even though it was only for a single murder, the murder was of a witness, which is one of the things that mark you for death. And the rival dealer, Raga, who was killed, was someone they had shot already. And when he refused to not come to court, Emil finished him off on behalf of the guy who shot him, Humphrey Stewart. And Emil made the big-time news yet again about 10 years ago. In freedom, he wasn't known for his big heart. He was known as the most feared member of the Flatbush, Brooklyn Coke and Smoke Patio crew, and the killer of at least 2 men, a Jamaican dock worker he shot in the back, and Raga, like I said, the guy who was preparing to testify against a man named Humphrey Stewart that was part of the Patio crew, who was the one who had actually shot him during their territorial dispute back in Flatbush in the 90s. Quote, "A snitch must die," Mr. Dixon once told a fellow inmate, according to testimony during his trial. Now, he was convicted in 2003 of drug distribution and those murder charges, and he was sentenced to life, no parole. But Emil Dixon, while he was looking through his own case file, found a 2001 statement made by an informant that affected another case, a guy named Derek Deacon, who was apparently wrongly convicted of murder. Derek Deacon was an old associate of the Dixons from Brooklyn that had been convicted of killing a 16-year-old incident back in 1989. And Emil saw that the informant in Derek Deacon's case had made statements that maybe Derek Deacon wasn't the guy who shot the kid. And the informant gave that statement in front of a bunch of law enforcement, and that the real shooter was a guy who had fled to Jamaica a long time ago and was thus safe from prosecution. And that he further alleged that a federal prosecutor, some federal agents, and a New York Police Department detective were in the room when this informant told them that, in fact, the real killer was not Derek Deacon. But as it turned out, none of the law enforcement notified Mr. Deacon of this potentially exculpatory evidence, even though all those law enforcement officials were obligated to do that. And Deacon, who's almost 60 now, didn't know anything about this for 3 years until Dixon, who, like I said, knew Deacon from back in the day, maybe he was in the Patio crew, sent the evidence to a relative and asked that it be passed to Mr. Deacon. So, long story short, this made the paper, and Emil Dixon helped remove blame from Derek Deacon onto some Patio crew member who was safely away in Jamaica, and Deacon got out in 2013. Strange and interesting how things work out sometimes. And the Dixon made yet another high-profile news, and that was another high-profile story for the Dixons. Now, here's a breakdown of the case that got Emil Dixon his life term, the Raga guy. In the summer of 1999, Humphrey Stewart became aware that Mary Jane was being sold at one of the Patio crew's locations in Flatbush by this guy nicknamed Raga, who was not down with the crew. And on July 29th, 1999, complaining of Raga's competition in front of Stewart's building, Stewart approached other Patio crew members and asked if anyone had a, quote, fire stick, meaning a gun. And later that day, Raga got shot several times. So he was injured but recovered. And he at first refused to reveal the identity of the assailant to the police. He didn't say it was Humphrey Stewart. But he ended up, because he had told, I think, his girlfriend and wife, who really did it, or supposedly, Humphrey Stewart came on the radar, and he informed the police that the shooter had in fact been his rival, Humphrey Stewart, and Raga testified before a grand jury in March of 2000 to that effect. Now, immediately after the shooting of Raga, Humphrey Stewart had fled Brooklyn for upstate New York, Buffalo to be exact, where he continued to participate in selling stuff for the Patio crew, distributing narcotics. In January 2000, Humphrey Stewart got picked up in Buffalo on drug charges. He was eventually returned down to Brooklyn to face outstanding charges with respect to yet another 1995 shooting in Brooklyn. So these guys are getting busy. But while he had been in Buffalo, Stewart was sending Raga messages telling him he better not testify. But in March of 2000, Raga told the police detective that, Stewart was the one who shot him, and that he was going to go ahead and testify. And Emil Dixon got in. He was talking to Stewart on the phone, and Emil Dixon went and threatened Raga. And eventually, in July of 2000, Emil Dixon was convicted of gunning down Raga, which earned him the life no parole in federal prison. That's what Ashcroft was trying to give him the death penalty for. So, perhaps it was one of Raga's family members who got their revenge on their killer's brother 20 years after the fact, or it was revenge for the 30-year-old murder that Rico Dixon himself had been convicted of the other guy. Who knows? 20 years of violence or 30 years of violence over who got to sell reefers in one corner in one neighborhood of one borough in the Rotten Apple. Did those murders long ago or some other unknown crime echo through the decades all the way up to September 2021, resulting in a shooter dressed as an Hasidic Jew hitting Jermaine Rico Dixon on the mean streets of Ozone Park, Queens? Or had Rico gotten himself mixed up in some new criminal business in the brief 11 months since his release, because there is one detail I left out at the beginning. Cue ominous music. Dun, da, da, da. Rico Dixon had 10 G's in cash in his pocket when he walked out of that Comfort Inn, so he was up to something, I guess. And reports, which I assume come from law enforcement reviewing the same surveillance footage that captured the hit, had recorded Rico Dixon being paranoid every time he walked out to his car, seemingly expecting a shooter to pop out and run down on him. As they say in New York, he was always looking over his shoulder. I guess that's why someone had to dress up as an Hasidic Jew to get him. Only time will tell, but perhaps it won't. There are 8 million stories in the naked city, and this was the tale of a few top shotters out of Flatbush, Brooklyn. Patio crew, our prophet, American Dope.